Hello, folks, and welcome back to, well, it's not Chris Wyatt Reports. It's another one of our segments. This is a new one. It'd be episodic if things go well, if Kanthan and I don't wind up in fisticuffs across the Atlantic here. Welcome back to the program, to the Inaugural. Can folks hear me? Are we getting any feedback there? At least when you slow chat, it's an unusual time to broadcast. Let me just make sure that my mic is going out. It is. But welcome to the Inaugural Iconic with Kanthan and Chris, none other than South African media legend Kanthan Pillay, my co-host for this segment. You notice that I'm humble. I'll put the K before the C. You know, we didn't even do it alphabetically. Kanthan, how's it going, brother?
I'm fit and fabulous as always, and you're looking good too, Chris.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's the hair. It's really it's feathered just right.
Well, I think that I'm at the stage in my life where the fact that I have hair is a bit of a flex, because most of my contemporaries don't.
Well, I'm not that far behind you, and it's funny because when I started doing these YouTube broadcasts 4 years ago after I left active service in the military, I had a couple people who weren't being facetious; they were being genuine. Guys who actually, were follically challenged, and they asked me where I got my rug from. I'm like, what? I have a rug on the floor. I didn't get it at first. They thought this was a hairpiece. I'm like, hairpiece? That's me, man. Listen, I was in the Alps when Chernobyl went up, so all that radiation hit us in the Alps. I think that's why I have this thick flowing hair, that radiation, that genetic change, mutation.
You should have had a choice of some other superpower, though. I think,
yeah.
I'd happily trade my head of hair for a bigger brain.
Oh, no, I'm happy with my brain. I trade it for a bigger paycheck, a bigger bank account, maybe. Yeah, whether we like it or not, money does make the world go round. And if you were in Tokyo on Monday, it was a bad day, 12% drop in the Nikkei. But Tuesday, it came back 10%, and the market stabilized. But the markets are in for a bit of a rude awakening here because a lot of stuff is highly overvalued. But I don't know, we might talk about economics. But folks, this program, Kanthan kindly agreed. We met in person finally for the first time on my last trip to South Africa a few weeks back. And I don't know how Kanthan saw it, but it was a lovely meeting. He's a very gracious gentleman and showed me around this lovely facility he's at, and I really enjoyed it. We had a lekker conversation, and I kind of put him on the spot and said, hey, would you like to do a segment? And he said, yeah, we could do that. But he's a busy guy. I'm a busy guy. And next thing I know, I'm like, hey, I better ask if we should do a segment. So here we are. Now, if you are expecting a mutual admiration society, you're going to be a little disappointed. We have mutual respect, but Kanthan and I think clearly, while we agree on most things, there's a few things we differ on. And he likes to niggle and point at the U.S. sometimes and dig on the U.S. So I notice he does that on Big Daddy Liberty when I'm not there. But I'm here now, so I'm ready to defend the Stars and Stripes. No, but seriously, I think that the idea here is to have an intellectual conversation about issues of importance, South Africa, USA, and around the world. And this is a great person to do with. Okay, I've talked for a long time, Kanthan. What are your thoughts on what we're doing here?
I'd like to start by saying that I absolutely love the U.S. I spent some of the best years of my life out there. They gave me a fabulous education, back in the day when the Ivy League actually counted for something. And I made some of the best friends of my life out there. And I think that right now, the U.S. is probably at the lowest point it's been for the past century or so. But I'm also hopeful that a year from now, we'll be looking back at this and smiling.
Well, I can't disagree with you 100% on that. It pains me to have to excuse and apologize for America, but I find myself doing that repeatedly to people around the world now. And a lot of times when you find yourself overseas, as people know, I've lived in 16 foreign countries for the past 40 years, and many of them in Africa and all over the continent. In the past, people would attack America, and I could defend it because most of what we're doing was above board, and it was for the benefit of others and for the global system. But I find myself apologizing for America far too often now, and that's not my responsibility. It's up to politicians to clean it up. But I'm with you, Kanthan. America is probably at an ebb, the lowest point it's been in a century. Actually, as a young man, I thought 1979 was the lowest point, but we've surpassed that despicable period in time.
Yeah, I remember 1979 quite well. And yes, and a lot of that is currently playing out in the Middle East to some extent in terms of what happened back in those days. It's a fascinating situation that we have going down right now. And it really comes to the point of the difference between what went down at the time with Jimmy Carter in charge and what happened immediately after when Reagan stepped into the ring. And you suddenly saw a really dramatic reset in terms of the way in which the US was actually engaging with the rest of the world, pretty much in terms of what I would think of as core values that once defined the US. I was talking to someone earlier today about truth, justice in the American way, but which is what most people toss out. But I prefer to think of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Well,
And
I'm with you
yeah,
100% on that. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's right there in the Declaration of Independence. Our creators endowed us a certain. I know your position on that, but we don't talk about that. But whatever the case is, however, we have natural rights, and life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness should be among those.
yeah. So I think that there was certainly at the point at which Reagan stepped into the scene, and there was a lot that happened in the world. We saw the destruction of the Soviet Union and everything in its orbit, and I think that nearly all of us around the world were very grateful that that came about at the time. But of course, what's happened since then is a bit of a mess.
Well, 100%. I'm with you on that. I was a young man in uniform in the Army, as at that time just recently commissioned after having served as a non-commissioned officer and finishing university and back in service. And then, of course, as that all ended, wound up in the Gulf War in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq. And I was also very excited about the end of the Soviet Union. I thought, here we go. And of course, Francis Fukuyama wrote a famous book, The End of History, which was misinterpreted by most people. And he was pillared for that. But I mean, his book was not wrong. It's just the title was unfortunate. And, I'm sure you've been published. I know I've been published. And sometimes your editors give you titles that you didn't ask for. I don't know if that's the case here. But the world looked like a very promising place and a lot of great future for everyone. And we kind of meandered through the 90s with geopolitical mistakes here and there and never really getting anywhere. We talked big things. Clinton talked about engagement and enlargement, engaging the world, enlarging our relations. And we've actually, after 9/11, sort of retreated in some respects. We stayed deeply engaged with people on the counterterrorism front, but a lot of things that were core U.S. values seem to have disappeared from the public specter, and it's the public zone, I guess you could say. I mean, it shocks me, Kanthan, how few Americans understand our political system. When I was a child, we went to middle school, whatever grade you guys call that in South Africa, but that's about 7th grade or 8th grade, excuse me, just before you enter high school, and we had to take civics. And in each state, you have to take state history. So I was living in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania has a fascinating history. It just goes back to the very founding of course, prehistory before Europeans arrived, but the very founding of this republic with William Penn, a Quaker who came here, religious freedom, large German immigration, all that stuff going on, the interaction with Native Americans and wars and such. Fascinating history. Well, I moved to Ohio in 8th grade, because 7th grade was Pennsylvania history, 8th grade was civics. I went to Ohio, took civics there, and they forced me, once I went into high school, to take Ohio history because I hadn't had it. Otherwise, I couldn't go into high school. So I took Ohio history, and I got to tell you, other than Aaron Burr and Blennerhassett Island and Alexander Hamilton, it's pretty boring. So, but my point with all that was that is I had civics. Then, as in high school, I had American government. So I eventually became a historian and political scientist, but even if I had been that, I would have been civically prepared to understand our system, the Electoral College, why we have 3 co-equal branches of government, how they have checks and balances against each other, who gets all of that was taught to me as a young man. My sister went through school a few years after that, didn't have American government. Then my brother, a couple years behind her, didn't have American government. It didn't even have civics. We have generations of Americans who know less about their government than people studying at Oxford. That's pretty sad.
But I think it's a global problem, Chris. And if you look in terms of what we've got out in our neck of the woods right now, there is no attempt to actually teach anything about the framework of the Constitution, the separation of powers, how the parliamentary system works, how laws get passed, and all of those various things, which leads to the absurd situation where people assume that the government has the ability to do whatever it wants to do, that the courts have the ability to do what it wants to do. You notice this utterly bizarre notion that they have right now that's being peddled by one of the parties in your country that says that Trump intends to stay president for life, as an example. And anyone with a fundamental understanding of the way in which the laws of the United States are structured would tell you, first and foremost, the president does not have the right to do whatever he wants to do. Secondly, the president is held in check by both Congress and by the courts, depending on the appropriate circumstances. And thirdly, if the guy intended to stay in power forever, he wouldn't have stepped down the first time. Can we be clear about this?
Well, no, Kanthan, that's absolutely right. So what's really interesting about this, sorry to interrupt here, but what's really interesting, we'll probably do a lot of that interrupting each other. You're welcome to interrupt me at a point if you need to. But it's interesting because for the past 8 months, the Biden campaign, their entire message was, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Donald Trump he's going to be a fascist. He's going to be totalitarian. I'm like, dude, he's got a record. He was president. Every time the left attacked him over some issue like, building the border wall or doing this or doing that with executive orders, every court challenge, the Trump administration adhered to the court's decision. It went to trial. When they won, then they continued. If they lost, they tried to appeal it or they let it go. Unlike the Obama administration, unlike the Biden administration, who simply circumvent the Supreme Court, the circuit courts, and illegally take action like the student loan debt forgiveness. They have no authority to do that, and they're forgiving billions of dollars and building an immoral perspective amongst people that, I can just borrow money, they'll forgive it later on. Hey, I have to pay for your student loan now because it was forgiven. It's your responsibility.
Well, essentially, they're buying votes from the laptop class. Isn't that what they're doing?
Exactly. That's exactly. And buying votes from an ignorant, uninformed class that doesn't know better, like you say, it's amazing. So not just with the Trump, with he's going to be a danger, but let me take the story a little bit further. So Trump's a threat to democracy. Trump throws out elections. He won't listen to voters. I'm sorry. Donald Trump is the only candidate running for president of the United States right now that was actually selected and elected by Republican voters in a primary system across the country in which he won overwhelmingly the votes. Kamala Harris wasn't picked by Democratic voters. 14.5 million Democrats voted for Joe Biden. They've been disenfranchised in a palace coup led by the likes of Obama and Wall Street, who pushed out. And if anybody has any doubt about that, why was $300 million sitting on the table waiting to be donated to the Democratic campaign? Because they knew Biden was going to lose and they weren't going to throw the money after it. As soon as he went, they threw it in. This is who's running it. By the way, before I let you jump back in here, Tim Walz, I'm making the argument. I have no evidence of it, but it seems possible to me that, of course, Kamala's a sock puppet, just like Joe was, and that Tim Walz is the guy they really want with his radical ideas, and he's actually going to be running the White House if they get in, not Kamala. Anyway, just a thought.
Well, it certainly sounds like that's going to be an interesting one to pull off. I've seen a parody doing the rounds today of Obama issuing instructions to Kamala based on, something to that effect.
I'm a real boy.
I think the more fascinating thing for me, though, is just how exactly they intend to pull off an election victory, given that you have a candidate right now who is so deeply unpopular that when she actually ran for president on her own bat, she ended up with no delegates.
Yeah,
there was no one actually prepared to go and vote for her.
She had less than 2% of Democratic voters vote for her, and then the press said that Republicans are racist for not voting for her. Republicans can't vote in Democratic primary or an Iowa caucus.
So how by every measurable standard, I can't imagine a scenario where the number of people who would vote on the basis that they don't want to vote for Donald Trump would then be prepared to actually go out and vote for Kamala Harris, especially since she's been so deeply unpopular. And up until as recently as a month ago, we were constantly reminded how deeply unpopular she was. And now suddenly she's the best thing since sliced bread. I totally don't get it. So look, I think that, my outsider perspective on this, Chris, and feel free to kind of, pounce in at any point. You've got particular groups of voters that you have right now in the US. Okay, there's diehard Republicans or diehard pro-Trumpers who are going to vote for Trump no matter what. On the other side, you've got diehard Democrats who will vote blue no matter who. And then you've got people in the middle. And the people in the middle are, I think there's a couple of people out there. There are people who didn't like what Joe Biden was doing, but at the same time didn't want to vote for Trump. And then there are people who don't like Trump, but at the same time didn't want to vote for Joe Biden. Now that Biden's out of the picture, those kind of need to be rearranged. But from my perspective, there's this massive block that's sitting in the middle And I can't for the life of me see them suddenly pivoting to this person that has been deeply dislikable, who is clearly ignorant of almost everything in terms of the way in which the world works, who is not able to string a sentence together without going into word salad, and suddenly is being thrust upon people as the choice that they need to follow in order to save democracy. I can't see people falling for this. What am I missing?
No, you're not missing anything, unless, well, you probably are well aware of this. I mean, you're in the media. But what's happening here is the corrupt media, the legacy media, are in the tank for this. I mean, they're running stories. So, for instance, the Washington Post ran a story saying that Kamala Harris has overtaken Trump in the polls, but they didn't list the polls. They didn't really go into any depth and analyze those polls. They did leave a graphic at the lower end of the story for those who read below the fold, using the old newspaper term. You know, it's online, there's no fold, but below the fold. And that graphic shows that in the 7 battleground states where the race is going to be won. Look, it's not going to be won in New York or California, Florida, or Texas. They're gone left and right. That's a done deal. You're not going to get any votes. Don't waste your time going to Florida. Don't waste your time going to California. If you're a Democrat, you're going to win. I mean, just look at 2016. Hillary Clinton got 8 million votes in California, and Trump got 3.9 million. The entire voting difference in the election was California. Yet Hillary had more votes. Yeah, because of one leftist state. But here's the thing. They had below the fold a graphic, and they listed the 7 battleground states. Of course, Pennsylvania is one of them. In 5 of the 7, Trump has a 5-point lead or more. In the 6th one, he's tied. In the 7th one, which I think was Wisconsin, he's less than a point behind. That's where the race is going to be decided. And the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter how many people show up at a Trump rally in Florida, how many people show up at Kamala rally in Philadelphia. That's done. Those votes are decided. The votes you're talking about, the ones people have to go after. And you're not going to get that. The reason they went to Philadelphia is because they know they can rent a crowd and they can fill the stadium. They couldn't even do that. It was a pretty good crowd, but not great. But no matter where Trump goes, I mean, he's like the Rolling Stones. People show up, you know, whether they like him or hate him. Trump, I don't know, he's almost like a musical performer out there. I mean, it's crazy. The crowds are insane. In Butler, where he was shot when they tried to assassinate him, in the last election, just before the election went off in late October, 50,000 people showed up at an event in Butler. Not the same venue, but in Butler. That's insane. I mean, that's like going to a Who concert. You know what I'm saying? Politicians don't get those kind of crowds. And these are enthusiastic voters. And look, it's not everybody in the state that went. I mean, it's a small fraction. So the battleground states are where it's going to be won. The press are not telling the truth about that. They're trying to pimp her up. And you notice she is trainable like a French poodle. She's trainable. Notice that she no longer cackles, although last night she sort of cackled a little bit. But she hasn't really cackled until last night, the entire time since this has happened.
But that's a bit unfair to say, Chris, because she has hardly been seen. It's not like she's been on public platforms. It's not like she's been giving press conferences. I mean, come on, let's be real here. I mean, what you've been getting exposed to are curated sound bites.
Right, by the media. That's what I'm talking about. That's exactly what's going on. And, yeah, hey, listen, but do you have a light on the desk or something to make you look kind of ominous there? I can't see you very, if you've got a light, or are you hiding?
I could probably get up and try plugging in a light, but
no, it's okay.
You're probably aware of the fact that cameras are fundamentally racist, right?
Well, I hear that. They make you look darker than you are. You know, Indians are considered white. You know that, right?
Only in the U.S. because of the fact. Only in the U.S. simply because of the fact that Indian Americans happen to be the most prosperous group in the country based on their earnings. So they are topping the list in terms of income streams right now. Well, but a little known fact is that from this continent, Nigerian Americans are way up there as well.
Oh no, it is a little known fact, but not to me. That's the thing, you know. Let's digress on this topic for a moment. When I hear the nonsense that we heard with George Floyd and systemic racism, the system is rigged against Black Americans, I always offer the counterpoint. Then please explain to me why every single Ghanaian, Liberian, Nigerian, Cameroonian, Kenyan that I know that resides in America is a wild success. All of them. They all got jobs. Some of them are Home Depot managers. Some of them are successful businessmen. They're university lecturers. Why are all of these immigrants, Black African immigrants to America, successful, wealthy, with an average income higher than native-born Americans, and having lived here for 10, 20, 30 years, if the system is rigged against Black people? They're Black, aren't they? Or did we miss that? You know, did we miss that at a Klan meeting somehow? You know, come on.
You can add Ethiopian Americans to that lot. Up, you know, particularly up in the Massachusetts area, incredibly prosperous community, and again, strong work ethic, very family centered, and incredibly prosperous.
Yeah.
Now they ran away from the communist regimes in the early 80s, and they came to the U.S. and they were fruitful and multiplied.
Well, and the same thing happened in California with Persians. The Iranians came here before the Shah fell and when he fell, and we have 600,000 Iranians living in California. And some of them are Hollywood movie stars, and some of them very successful business people. They're involved in the film industry. They're involved in the defense industry. Very successful groups of immigrants. The problem with the African-American community historically is there are too many community leaders who use victimization as a way to achieve things. And that's not an achievement, using victimization. And so they get a lot of Black Americans to wallow in self-pity and blame people for things. It's funny because the majority of white Americans, I don't know what the heck white is. White to me is, Scandinavian, Northern Europe, but whatever. Yes, I'm not white, I'm pink. But anyway, so I'm a person of color too there, Kanthan, I'm pink. But seriously, it's interesting because the historical African American community keeps itself back in many respects. Many people in that community, those who walk off the plantation, so to speak, and experience America for itself, by and large, do very well in America. We see, look at Ben Carson. The guy is a pediatric brain surgeon. He did brain surgery on toddlers and infants, and they survived. I mean, there's 12 people on the planet that can do that, and this guy gets pillared because he's a sellout and Uncle Tom. It's utter nonsense. He's a brilliant man. He'll put you to sleep. He's a very calm talker, but I mean, those who step off the plantation, so to speak, and speak for themselves and realize that they have agency are the ones that succeed in America, and the system doesn't hold them back. Look, we can admit that there are some injustices in the judicial system, but now we see those injustices playing out across all ethnic groups, particularly if you're a patriotic white male American. You're feeling the wrath that Black American men have been feeling for a long time.
So I think that the interesting thing for me, just to go back to something you touched on at the beginning of this conversation, is the overall impact that the economic fallout is going to have on this campaign that's coming up right now. And so my take on this is that Japan suddenly raising the interest rates actually caught the Biden administration flat-footed. I think it was something completely unexpected. And then the knock-on effect in terms of the U.S. economy was, I think, actually quite a bit of a wake-up call for lots of people. And look, we're not going to go into the logistics of how this thing came about. I mean, essentially, the technicalities about the yen carry trade don't really matter. But you need to couple this with the fact that the U.S. now claims to be roughly around 2% economic growth in terms of GDP growth. And, let's just take that as something that's a true reflection right now in terms of the growth of the overall productivity. But I used this example in a discussion earlier today where I was saying, now let's just assume that each of those percentage points counts for $1 trillion. So let's just say that the U.S. economy has grown by $2 trillion over the past year. At the same time, you must consider that the Biden administration has injected $4 trillion of stimulus into the economy, which means that what you are seeing in terms of overall GDP growth is in fact a negative 4%, versus a positive 2%. And that, to my mind, is something that is going to come back to bite the Democrats in this election. And the reason why I'm saying this is that if you look in terms of the basket of goods that one normally uses to judge inflation, I was looking at prices of things like milk and prices of things like eggs, which are really fundamental in terms of how an economy works. When you have the price of milk going up by 86%, so if you're paying $1, you're now paying $1.86. Price of eggs almost doubling. And these are things that are hitting across the board. And meanwhile, you have on the stock markets, there's essentially 7 tech stocks that have been carrying the overall market.
NVIDIA being one of them.
NVIDIA being one of them. But if you remove those 7 tech stocks, then the S&P 500 is actually gone backwards. substantially during the Biden era. So the artificial growth that you've seen, based on the fact that you have these 7 stocks where the US happens to be a world leader, that are basically carrying the rest of the market. But the impact of that growth is not going to filter back down to people in the streets. And, basically, and this cuts across the board. So, whether you're black, white, you're still going to be affected by the overall increase in your transportation costs, the overall increase in your fuel bills. Electricity costs was another one that had pretty much spiked as well. So all of these things are adding up. So I can't for the life of me see a scenario where people would still be willing to go out and vote for the Democrats against that backdrop.
Now, on the face of it, it makes no sense whatsoever. If you just
but at the same time, But at the same time, to that point, when I looked at plotting the course of the last election, and I was watching it very carefully, and it was very clear that Trump was going to carry that, and then suddenly you had in these handful of key cities where suddenly you had hundreds of thousands of votes that popped out of nowhere.
Detroit.
And the question for me now is, Philadelphia being a case in point. So how does the American electorate prevent a situation where that happens again? Because, sitting from where I'm sitting, and let's be very clear, I don't have a vested interest in the U.S. elections because I'm observing this from a distance. But it was very clear to me that there was something distinctly fishy going on out there.
How do you prevent that happening this time? I don't disagree with people. If we go any further in that conversation, YouTube will sanction us because of the censorship regime. But listen, I do have a vested interest, obviously, as an American and as a patriot who spent 37 years in uniform defending our Constitution and Americans' rights, whether they're black, brown, white, blue, green, Christian, Muslim, Jew, Sikh, Wiccan, I don't care. As long as you're an American and a valid green card holder who's here with our permission to enter the country properly, you're welcome. And that's what I defended. But I do have a vested interest, and not just for that reason, but I'm a judge of elections. And so I oversee elections in my precinct.
Oh, that's interesting. How does that work?
Well, okay. So around the country, you have polling stations, and there has to be someone in charge of those polling stations and the poll workers. Now, in Pennsylvania, the poll workers get a small payment for their time, but it's not worth the aggravation. People do it because they're patriotic and they want to see the elections go through. It's an elected position. A couple of years ago, because of what happened in 2020, and also because of what happened in 2016, when so many people turned out that they were overwhelmed. In 2016, I just came back from Ethiopia, and of course, I vote by federal absentee ballot because I was military and I was not in my home state for 30 years. So every year I had to apply for it again and send and that has legal jeopardy because it goes to the Postal Service. You go to jail for 5 years if you commit fraud. Anyway, so I had already voted that election day in 2016. I was at the War College. I finished my day. I came to my local place where I live, and I had not stood in line for an election since 1988 when I was at university. And I wanted to stand in line because it was an exciting election, between Hillary and Donald Trump. So I went to the local polling station, and it was in a different location. They moved it to a church now, which is a much better facility, a big parking lot. Anyway, so there were at least 3,000 people standing in line at 5:30 in the evening, waiting to vote for a poll that closed at 8:30 or 8 o'clock. Anyway, so I stood in line for an hour, chatting with people, just having a good time. How's it going? And then I said, okay, I got to go home. And the guy's like, you giving up? You leaving? I said, no, I already voted. What do you mean you already voted? No, I'm in the Army. I already sent my ballot in. I already confirmed they got it. I'd say, what are you doing here? I'm like, this is historic, man. I'm standing in line. Anyway, but okay, so you have a judge of election. I just want to tell that story. So you have a judge of elections that's elected. And what I did, because of 2016, the big crowd, and what happened in 2020, the current judge, who's a really good guy, he still does poll work, he didn't want to do it anymore. Because he got harassed at the polling station, people made bogus claims, and he didn't want to deal with it. It was too frustrating. So I was not a member of the Republican Party because, as an officer, I felt I need to be an independent politically, so that nobody can say you're Democrat or Republican, and I could vote however I wanted, but I just wouldn't be. So from the time I became a commissioned officer in 1989 until I retired in 2019, I wasn't affiliated with a political party. I tended to vote conservative, but anyway. So when I retired in 2019, my first vote after the election, because I had to vote in Ohio, even though I lived here, so my first was the primary in 2020. And I registered as a Republican because for 30 years I couldn't vote in primaries. They're closed primaries. As an independent, I couldn't vote. So that's not fair. I want to decide. For 30 years, I got stuck with whether every idiot the Democrats or Republicans put in front of me. So now at least I get to affect one party. So I registered a Republican. I went to the polls and I looked and it said Judge of Elections. There was nobody there. Like, nobody's on the ballot. So I just scribbled my name down. What the heck? Maybe I'll get it. That's an important job. And afterwards, I talked to local representative. That's the office I ran for recently and did not win in the primary. There's my ran for state representative. Anyway, but so that representative, I talked to, she goes, you should have told us. You only need 10 votes on the primary, and then your name goes on the ballot for the fall. I said, okay. So in the August, I went online and looked at the ballot that was going to be for us in November, the general election. And I looked, and there wasn't a Democrat, there wasn't a Republican, so nobody came forward. So I decided to do a writing campaign, and on the Sunday before the election, Saturday, Sunday, I went around my neighborhood, a small neighborhood, about 40 houses, and I knocked on doors and said, hey, no one's running, this is important, someone's got to do it. Would you be willing to vote for me? I talked to Democrats and Republicans, although it's about 85% Republican here. And then I went a couple other places, and I won by a landslide. I mean, about 300 votes. I mean, that's a landslide for a write-in candidate. I mean, the closest guy to me had 130 or something like that. Anyway, so the judge of elections, I ran for that position. The judge oversees the poll workers, organizes the site, and then runs machines. We use those, what was that company everybody hates?
Dominion.
Dominion, yeah. So we use Dominion machines, but we have paper ballots, and we use a Sharpie because it dries. If you use ink, it doesn't dry, and it jams up the machine after a few dozen ballots. So they use a Sharpie. People are like, it doesn't work. It does work. Trust me, it's a system. And what I can attest to is that the way we run the polling stations in Pennsylvania, as long as you don't have a corrupt official, there's no way that things can go wrong. We have these tags and are numbered and all these multiple places. When I turn the machines on in the morning, I print out a zero report, so there's no votes in there, because they get used for training and such too. And I have to keep that. That's part of the record. I have to turn in and sealed like a bank, thing with the lock on it at the end of the night. And then we run the election all day. Once I turn those machines on and we ensure it's working, I leave the room and I'm not allowed to enter that room again unless the machine breaks. That way I can't be involved when people are dropping their ballots in or, that sort of thing. Only my poll workers can do that. And so then I run the station. I make sure that people get in, and we have a lot of provisional ballots where people claim, especially in the primary, that I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, and they're not on the list as a Republican or Democrat. Like, I always vote Republican, and their memory's a little faded because they always vote Republican, but in November, not in May. So anyway, so all that's part of it. The challenge is that in this district, which has 65,000 registered voters, I have the second largest precinct with over 5,500 voters. And that's a long day if people show up. So if we have a big turnout, which it'll be in November, it's going to be a lot of rectal bleeding dealing with that all day. I usually start my morning at 5 o'clock. We open polls at 7. We close them at 8 o'clock or something like that. And I don't get home to my house until about 11:15, 11:30 at night, because we're also the furthest geographically from where the courthouse is and where the votes get turned in. So I have to drive down there. And the other challenge is that in November, that's when the deer are rutting, and this is rural. So I gotta be careful I don't hit a deer and total my car. Anyway, that's a long story, but that's what a judge of elections is, and we have hundreds of thousands of them across the USA.
So tell me about these Dominion voting machines,
Yeah.
because I remember I was told that, these things are perfectly safe. They've been tried and tested. They're not connected to the internet. No one can actually hack into them. And then we suddenly had this shutdown of things that were automatically updated with software over the past week and a half or so. And I understand all of these Dominion machines were affected by this as well. And I'm trying to work out, if these things are not connected to the internet, how on earth did that happen?
Well, it couldn't have happened. I mean, there's different Dominion machines. All I can say is I'm not a fan of the machines. I'm a fan of paper. But what I can say is where people vote in my precinct and what we do, we turn in, I am 100% confident it's legitimate and nothing funky is going on. Now, the machines themselves are not connected to any network at all. There's no connection whatsoever. They have a compact flash card, not an SD, that's the compact flash card, and there's 2 of them. So the results are recorded on both of these. One of them, I break the seal after I close down the voting station, and I have witnesses there that watch me from the poll workers. They watch me. And then we break the seals. They record it. And we have 2 other people confirm the seal, and that goes in the bag. They see it go in the bag. So if it disappears, then, I must have stolen it. And then the other one stays in the machine. The machines stay locked up in that facility, and then the county comes by and collects all these machines all over the county after the election the next day in the morning. And so they take that back, they pull the card, then they put the two cards together and match up to see if they're different. Now, everyone votes on paper. It just gets read by a machine and tallies the total. At the end of the day, we're required by law to post the results from those machines. So before we leave. So what we do is we have to take the roll of tape. Well, it's like a till tape that come out of, from when you go to the restaurant like that. We go out, I tape it on the door of the building, all the results from all three machines. We have three machines at my post because it's such a large one. Other people have one or two. We also have a machine for people who are handicapped and disabled. You can breathe to vote. You got a little thing you put in your mouth to breathe. For people who have cystic fibrosis or something like that. I have people who have dementia. They're allowed to vote. It's legal. They have a guardian that comes with them and helps them. We have people legally blind. That machine can talk to you. You can talk to the machine. I've never had to use it. Everyone who's been physically disabled, we've been able to handle with a provisional ballot and do it that way. But those machines... the paper ballots are in the bottom of the machine. I have to collect all of them, stack them, and those paper ballots are turned in. So there's an audit trail paper for that. And they do audit, not all the machines, but they do audit a number of them to see if the numbers match what comes off on the tape. So those can be manipulated at the courthouse. I can't speak to that. But the problem with that is if those numbers differ from what's posted on the door, then they've got a problem. I'm not saying people don't cheat, but the ability to cheat is hampered by prudent safety measures, at least where I am at in York County, Pennsylvania. I can't speak for the other 66 counties of Pennsylvania or for Ohio or Nebraska. I can just speak for here. That's how they do it. And there are different Dominion machines, but the ones we use, that's how it works. I have, in 6 elections I've done, because I do primary and general election, in 6 elections that I've done, now this last one I didn't do because I was a candidate. I couldn't be the judge, so someone had to fill in for me, the primary. But in the 6 that I've done, I've only once gone into the room during the course of the election. And then we kept people out of the room while people not turned their ballots in, so I wouldn't see it. I had to go in because the machine jammed. And we were able to confirm that vote was counted. We were able to do that. So, yeah, anyway, so it wasn't double count, it was counted. It was just, it fed through and they counted, but it got caught in the end for some reason. I don't know, I think the voter must have bent the end of the form or something like that. And I had to go in and open it up, and then we got a seal and resealed it. We wrote the number down. So, that's how it's done here. I prefer paper ballots and also ballots that have names on them, not photographs of parties like you do in South Africa, but that's a whole other story. So you're an outside observer about this. We'll keep talking about this a little bit, but later I want to switch over. I was an outside observer for your election anyway, and I was there.
So let's talk about that because, we're, about a month and a half now since that election? Yep, just a little more than that. And lots of things that have been happening lately in this neck of the woods. One of the really interesting things that, from my perspective, in terms of what's been going on down here, is that all of the Democratic Alliance ministers who have now taken office have had a very good public persona so there's been substantial engagement that's been taking place on the part of ministers with the electorate. It's something that most South Africans are completely unfamiliar with.
Yeah, they're not accustomed to the ministers actually telling the truth or telling them there's a problem. No, and you're right.
Well, they're not accustomed to the ministers even talking to them,
or even working, or not. Just going around blue light escorts. Well, you've got Dion Schreiber.
Leon Schreiber.
Leon Schreiber and Dion McPherson. Those guys are doing a brilliant. Did I get the name right? Yeah,
Dean McPherson.
Dean McPherson. Yeah, Dean McPherson. Mm-hmm. I'm having a senior moment today. I couldn't even think of Dominion, so people people know I know who they are. And then of course you got Gate McKenzie, who's getting lots of attention too. Some of it positive, some of it not. But they're all outperforming ANC ministers. And they had an NEC meeting. They were pissed off because they're being outshined.
Well, but the astonishing thing is that so there's an ANC minister of sanitation who then gives a press conference. And basically says at the press conference, if you have a problem in your local community, you mustn't be contacting me. You must go and sort it out with your local authorities, which is exactly the wrong thing to do, as opposed to the DA ministers who are saying, if anything is broken, we need to know about it, and we're going to filter it down through the chain of command. So, first opportunity that you have to show that you can play the same game that the DA is doing, and you can actually be responsive to what your community wants. And there's a complete failure to read the room. Complete. Sorry.
No, it's entertaining. It's most of these ANC ministers couldn't control a kindergarten crash, let alone departments with hundreds or thousands of people responsible for millions of South Africans' basic needs and security. It's sad. I mean, but at least the cat in the hat's gone. We don't have to deal with him anymore.
The cat in the hat.
Yeah, whenever I do that, I usually put my Tegela hat on. It's not the same as his, but it's the closest.
Sure. But from your perspective, watching this country from outside, and you have lots of engagement with people down here. You're a regular on many of the shows featuring South Africans who are looking for informed input from across in your neck of the woods. But you also get the opportunity to know what's going on out here. And what's your perspective in terms of the way in which things have been shaping up around here?
Well, it's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. And no, we didn't set this up ahead of time. No, but no. So let me frame this before I answer that. First, I come at it from a perspective that's truly unique. Okay, I come at it from perspective. I was a 30-year intelligence professional and analyst, and a published author in academia, a radio personality, and also someone who is an elected official, a judge of elections. So I bring all that, and having been a leader, run multi-billion-dollar programs, having run organizations that are global with tens of thousands of employees, $3 billion budget, so that's 60 billion Rand. That was my budget one year. So I've done those things. So that's the perspective I bring to it. Also, to be in the interest of full disclosure, I'm politically conservative, not way over here, but politically conservative. I'm especially economically conservative. But anyway, so that's where I come from. So I went there and I almost didn't make it, Kanthan, because my passport, all my passport renewals and issuances have been for the past 4 decades while I was either in the Army or in the Army as a diplomat. And I would typically be overseas and I would take it to the consulate and I'd get it back in a few days. Well, as just a regular old Joe Schmo here, I had to go through the process that civilians do. And it took them over 8 weeks to get my passport back to me. And so I couldn't book a flight. And finally, I called them on the Monday before your election, the week before, and said, hey, what the heck? And they said, well, we can't guarantee you anything, but if you pay $80 or $60, we can take the fee and we can expedite it. We can't guarantee you'll get it in time, but then you have to pay $20 for the overnight delivery. I said, okay, fine, just charge me. Here's my credit card. And so 2 days later, my passport was sitting on the front stoop. There was no Zulu on my stoop. Ooh, there's the reference to a book. No Zulu on my stoop, but there was a passport on my stoop. So I quickly got it. Yep, okay. I went on Delta. I booked a ridiculously expensive flight to South Africa. My original plan was actually flawed. Because I know so many people, I thought I'd go to Gauteng and cover the election in Pretoria and in Joburg. But thinking back, that probably wasn't a sound because I wouldn't have been able to get to so many places. Instead, since I was getting there the night before the election, my best bet was to just stay in Western Cape, and that was my plan. So I stayed in Western Cape, and it worked out very well. I went to 14 polling stations in the course of the day. And what happened is that one of my viewers suffered a stroke, and there's a woman in her stroke group who's with Action SA, a very energetic, dynamic candidate down there. And so I met her at the Somerset West polling station. Got there about 9:45 because I was coming from north of Cape Town, and there were about 800,000 people in line. And we got the impression initially, and the IEC put it out that, hey, there's going to be a huge turnout today. It looks like it's going to be big. That was a misleading. They didn't mislead intentionally, but they had university lines, and they had. So what was happening is they were incompetent. It wasn't because there were a lot of people. They were incompetent. So from there, I met the, is it Sobi, Angela Sobi, I think her name is, from Action SA. She was a premier candidate for Western Cape. I interviewed her right there on the street outside the polling station. And then she invited me to go along with them to Khayelitsha. So I went to Khayelitsha, to 5 polling stations in Khayelitsha. And then she's from Monenberg. I was going to depart there and head over to Rondebosch. But she said, why don't you come with me to Monenberg? And I'd never been. So, we went to Monenberg. And I observed it there. Then from Monenberg, I went to Rondebosch. I linked up with the referendum party guys who were there. They didn't have a good day. They didn't know it then. But I went to Rondebosch. From Rondebosch, I followed Phil Craig from Cape Independence Advocacy Group and the referendum party over to Sea Point. And from Sea Point, I parted ways with him. And then I did the rest on my own. I went to Tableview. I went to Parklands. And I went to Woodbridge Primary. And it was amazing. What I can tell you is that in Khayelitsha, almost every station I went to was well run, was efficient, was calm. The people who were electioneering were the correct distance away from where they're supposed to be. Everybody was cordial. The Pan-African Congress, the EFF, they were the worst because they had no support out there. They're just like kind of lying in the sun, kind of bummed out. But everybody was pretty cool. Everything was calm. There were no problems. It was run effectively. What I will say about the election is that at certain polling stations, The IEC did not train people properly or did not equip them properly. And that is why we had such long lines. The table view, when I went there, it was almost 9 o'clock. And there were 1,300 people standing in line around the corner. And I will say this too, I never trust YouTube, and Ronaldo and Roman and others told me a few years ago, people over South Africa know who you are. You're known everywhere, man. People like you. I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, okay, thanks. But every time I go to South Africa, no, but I mean, I'm actually a humble guy. I mean, I joke around, but every time I go to South Africa, people come up to me out of nowhere and they recognize me. I can't shave this damn beard because nobody will recognize me. I want to get rid of it. I keep shortening, but anyway. So on that night, in the last 4 stations I went to, in the dark, half a dozen people came up to me that knew who I was. I never met before. And that made it a really cool experience. And so I can say that the election was free and fair from what I observed in the Western Cape. I didn't get the other 8 provinces. I can't speak for that. There was nothing that MK is claiming going on. And the results are exactly what I expected. My predictions, and people can go back and watch my videos, I predicted this election exactly the way it turned out before the election, a couple months. And I predicted the ANC. I said they were going to go 38 to 42%. Best case. I nailed that. And I made that prediction after the municipal elections in November of 2021, Kanthan.
I think it was a fair call to make. And, many people asked me, so, a bit of background. I did start a political party along with Roman and a couple of other people.
That would be the Purple Cow Party, the Capitalist Party?
Yeah, well, it was the Capitalist Party of South Africa, yeah. ZACP. But the purple cow was our symbol.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is, purple is the color of royalty and prosperity. And, cows are a symbol of wealth for most of sub-Saharan Africa. And, so it was, a great symbol. And then, lots of people are asking me, well, are you going to be running again? And I said, no, once the ANC drops below 50%, my work is done. Because at that point, we get our country back. And to a large extent, that's actually what's happened. So you're seeing this trend right now where immediately at the point at which you have this handful of DA ministers, as well as Gayton, got to give the guy credit as well, step in and very immediately and very publicly start putting right things that were clearly, yes, but very visibly putting right things that were clearly wrong in terms of their departments.
And corruption and fraud that's going on, they've exposed that already. Billions of rand
absolutely
already exposed. Yep.
Yes. And that immediately is shifting the goalposts. It's showing the masses, hey, here's what's actually possible. And taking Home Affairs as a case in point, passport application. I've had people over the past period saying that their passport application has taken 8 days, 9 days, from the time of applying to the time of it actually being delivered. Mm-hmm. Now, that by global standards absolutely is a huge win.
Well, look at my passport. That's a huge win.
Yeah. So I was thinking very much about that at the point at which you were talking about your passport application. So I think that there are lots of those little things that are actually kind of falling into place. The question is, of course, how long this is actually going to be able to maintain stability, because the ructions within the ruling party are huge.
Yeah.
They're absolutely massive. So the province that I live in, Gauteng, which is really the most important province in the entire country, because we make up 50% of the country's GDP in this province, even though geographically we're the smallest province. And the ANC clique that is running this province didn't abide to the spirit and letter of the agreement that was signed between the ANC and the DA at a national level. And so effectively you have a bunch of the old kleptocrats who are still running this province and are quite determined to continue looting. So I don't know how long that situation is going to be sustainable. One of the difficulties that they've got right now is that in order for them to be passing any legislation, they need the cooperation of the EFF and MK in order to pass legislation. And because, the DA is certainly not going to be voting along with them. How long before that implodes? It's a difficult call for us to make, because remember, at the same time that this is happening, these are three players that actually hate each other and they're fishing in the same pond.
Yeah, exactly right. 100% of it. Two things. First one, Diane McMeekin is poking at me. She said, "I hope you heard that, Chris, from the horse's mouth. ZACP, not SACP." No, the other day the topic came up about the South African Capitalist Party, and I joked around because I said, when you guys said ZACP, I said, no, they called it the SACP to make fun of the South African Communist Party. No, but I mean, I know the joke was ZA, but I was messing around, so she's getting even with me there. So. But yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. The challenge, and this is impossible to call because the breach could come at any moment. It could be a dirty backroom deal where somebody gets a payoff. It could be a rupture from somebody's personality, their feelings being hurt. And so we don't know. But yeah, there is a very clear demarcation, and the old guard of kleptocrats, and not necessarily the old fossils in the party because there's younger ones doing it, but the Panyaza Lessufi crowd is definitely ignoring what the National Executive Committee is telling them to do. And at the provincial level, this breach is going to occur either there or in KZN first. We're going to see it. We've seen some trouble already in KZN, I think, with what's going on down there. But it's pretty
well. The dynamics in KZN, let's be very clear, are very different to what we've got out here. Because I think that certainly in KZN, a lot of people find this hard to believe, but Jacob Zuma right now, in terms of the MK faction, is actually the voice of reason, because the shall we say the bloodlust almost for a civil war in that part of the world is really intense. So everything that I've been seeing on the ground is indicating that there's a tremendous sense of disenfranchisation that has taken place among people who voted for Jacob Zuma's party. And, it was out and away the biggest party in the province.
Oh yeah, 45% of the vote. But and
exactly,
it's understandable that people feel that it's wrong there on the outside, but you all came up with the parliamentary system, not me.
No, absolutely. And look, you and I understand the rules of engagement.
Yeah.
But to go back to your starting point, earlier on in this conversation, where you're talking about the fact that people don't get taught civics, they don't get taught how the political systems work, and there's this built-in idea that simply because we're the biggest party, we need to call the shots. Now, the ANC at a national level found that out the hard way. And there are still those within the ANC who think that they have the right to call the shots because they're the biggest party numerically. But no, that's not the way in which our government actually works. But if you go down to KZN, which has a very strong rural base, a very traditional rural base, a very strong element of Zulu nationalism on the part of that particular bloc, and who really have the sense right now that they have, to a large extent, being cheated.
Yeah.
And that's actually a dangerous scenario. Because,
it is, because I feel cheated in 2020, to let you know.
Touche, absolutely. So the question is, is Zuma able to keep them in check, or more to the point, what is it going to take to prevent it from tipping over?
Yeah.
And so the most crucial thing from my perspective right now is the extent to which the coalition that's currently running that province is able to roll out real delivery of real benefits in the shortest possible time. Because that, to my mind, is the only thing that is going to prevent a situation where it just suddenly doesn't ignite.
Yeah. Well,
I think that there's a lot of people who are running gun shy because after the riots that we had in July 2021,
insurrection.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It was an internal ANC insurrection. That's what it was.
It was an internal ANC insurrection, absolutely. But at the same time, let's also take the view that there was a strong element of criminality.
Oh, of course. People took advantage of it. Yeah.
Who got themselves substantially organized. But the point at that stage was that they suddenly discovered that because they were civilians who were armed and were in a position to fight back, and the rioting process was very quickly quelled because of the fact that communities barricaded neighborhoods.
Phoenix, Amazimtoti, Pinetown.
Absolutely, but this was spread pretty much throughout the province, and when the rioters pitched up over there were barricades, and none shall pass. And so it was a very different scenario to what had happened historically, in Durban, for example, going back to 1949.
Yeah.
There were riots that were predominantly on the part of Zulu people and predominantly targeting my community.
Oh, absolute atrocities to the Indian community, which people forgot about completely. I haven't.
And suddenly, for the first time, there was this discovery that actually they can fight back, and this is not going to be the easy scenario. So I think one of the reasons why we haven't seen this boiling over yet is because there's a real fear about the possibility of the fact that people will shoot back. And there's a fascinating lesson from that, of course. If you look in terms of what is happening right now recently we saw it in Venezuela, in the case of the elections, where you've taken away the guns from the populace that once used to have them. And so that means pretty much you can do whatever you want to.
Australia.
Yeah, Australia is another good case in point. And the UK, of course, they can protest as much as they want, but they don't have the guns. The US, on the other hand, is an entirely different scenario. That's an entirely different
450 million firearms.
And now what happens at the end of this year if there suddenly is a feeling on the part of those people who are heavily armed that their country has actually been stolen? I think that I would be, really concerned about the possibility, if there's any attempt at election rigging this time around, that could very much turn into a bit of a conflagration. Certainly, I'm hoping that it doesn't come to that and that sanity prevails and fairness prevails. But let's not underestimate the ability of armed civilians to maintain a peaceful society. It is so crucial.
100% agree with you. But the thing about America, though, is that many of those people who are armed, that's not exclusive. Lots of people in cities are armed too, but many of the people that politically may have the views that they were robbed and they want to do something about it aren't in urban centers, whereas leftists are in the urban centers and they gather in numbers quickly and cause chaos. We've seen it in Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Minneapolis, Seattle, Portland, all over. That doesn't mean it's impossible. We've seen people on that side of the spectrum flood into D.C. and cause a little trouble there. But I think that that's kind of a built-in break. I hope that's the case. Certainly, I live in a peri-urban place. I mean, the state capital is 15 minutes away, and unfortunately, there's a lot of development here. I moved here because it was a small town. I may have to move to Wyoming because too many people are moving here, but it's a pretty mellow place around here, and people get along for the most part, politically anyway. Even the Democrats, Republicans tend to get along here despite the issues. But my concern with MK is, I get where you're coming from, Matt, and I don't disagree. You're right on that. I think that KZN is a powder keg that has to be monitored very closely, and somebody has to be able to open the relief valve to take the pressure off with whatever it takes, whether it's resources that go there or attention that goes there or something. But someone's got to relieve that pressure from time to time until things improve, which will probably be 30 years. But my concern with MK is this: it's not a real political party. It's a vanity project. And their actions show that. I mean, they fire the guy in charge of the party. They fire the guy in charge of the party. They fire the guy, the chief of staff.
Chris, I don't know if you've noticed, this is Africa.
Yeah. But I mean, I get you. But my point is, I mean, look, their senior guy in Parliament. I mean, how did he even get there? He wasn't on the list. How does Schlope become in Parliament when he wasn't even on the list? You have to go down the list. That list gets submitted. Is that even legal?
Yeah, it is legal because essentially what happens is that the party has the right to recall candidates at any given stage and to replace them with other candidates.
But yes, don't they have to be rank ordered, or is that just a misnomer?
No, it's a misnomer. Okay. Because you can at any point arbitrarily pull a person in because you want to draft them in at a particular level.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
Yeah. So for example, our former finance minister and former Reserve Bank governor Tito Mboweni.
Yep.
He had been the Reserve Bank governor. He went into the private sector. He was with Goldman Sachs and a bunch of other people for a while. They wanted to bring him back into Parliament, so they just simply toss out a member of Parliament and they bring him back into Parliament so that he can then be put in place as a minister. So that's perfectly legal, and I think that people waste a lot of time on trying to basically throw shade on what are essentially administrative processes. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, I don't really care who the party decides to put in place. I don't care if he's a terrible person or if she is a terrible person. From my perspective, you have laws that are meant to deal with things that are unlawful. If the person is doing things that you find objectionable, and certainly I find most of what our parliamentarians do to be objectionable.
Yeah,
but
take a
my
number.
my being offended doesn't mean that it's illegal.
Yes.
And so I take the same effect really in terms of what's going on with MK in Parliament. Let's not underestimate John Hlophe. So I've known John Hlophe since the Mandela era, when he was a High Court judge on the Cape High Court, and the guy is a phenomenal intellect. So you need to be able to keep that at the back of your mind, while at the same time holding the view that a person can have a phenomenal intellect and be corrupt or be dishonorable or all of those things. And very specifically, I remember writing an editorial in the Cape Times. I was managing editor at the time, when Hlophe wrote a very important judgment against the then ANC Speaker of Parliament, Frene Ginwala, who had tried to censor our lady who's heading up the Good Party, Patricia de Lille.
Patricia de Lille, yeah. But
Yes,
she was in the ANC at that time, correct?
No, she was not.
With
She was
Independent
there at
Democrats? Independent Democrats?
No, it was before. It was before she founded the Independent Democrats.
Okay.
She was there as a member of the Pan Africanist Congress.
Oh, that's
was
right.
her-
Yeah, that's it. Patricia. Yeah, if she doesn't
Yeah.
like what's going on, she'll start a new party. That's true.
That's right. Yeah. So that was her political home, but it was clearly a misuse on the part of the speaker. And don't get me wrong, I was very fond of Frene Ginwala. She was a speaker with a great deal of gravitas and a great deal of
Panache.
Panache, but more importantly, she was a good thinker. But when people are in power and they try to abuse the trappings of power in order to punish their opponents, and Exhibit A is the
United
lawfare
States.
that's happening in
United
the US right
States,
now.
yeah.
And Hlophe wrote what was, to my mind, one of the finest judgments of the early days of the South African legal system. There were quite a few of those that happened back in the day. So I think right now there's a tendency on the parts of lots of people to underestimate the caliber of person that Zuma has been pulling in to the parliamentary system right now. And to my mind, if you suddenly have a situation where Zuma decides to retire tomorrow and Hlophe is the person that is going to take over from him, he's no pushover. He's and consider that the fact that he was able to hold out in his position
Forever.
as the Chief Justice of the Western Cape High Court, in spite of the fact that all of the forces were amassed against him, and it took an incredibly long time to unseat him.
Yep.
And I suspect that Hlophe is certainly going to be there for the long haul. I think that he has a number of people on his hit list. And
I'm sure,
this is
I'm
great.
sure he has an enemies list, like Nixon.
Yeah, exactly. Very much so. So there are all of these pieces to the puzzle, and I think anyone who wants to throw scorn upon the fact that the likes of Hlophe have been in Parliament, as well as lots of people from the Zuma era who have been tossed out from other lucrative positions that they used to hold, and they're now being brought back into Parliament. And these guys are not by any means stupid people. In fact, at a number of levels, I rate them intellectually at a far higher level than most of the ANC deployees.
Well, I would have to say that the people we're talking about, by and large, are smarter than most people, and the fact that they're not in prison is proof of that.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
No, seriously. Look, Kanthan, I will take a second look at Hlophe. The only issue I had with him was his appointment to the Judicial Service Commission, just like I got with Julius Malema being on there. That's the joke.
But it's legal. You see,
I know, I got you. It is legal, but
my point is that Parliament has the ability to fix it.
Yes,
it is distasteful.
Yeah,
they can fix it, and they just need to amend the law accordingly.
Yeah.
But again, the question that comes to mind is, how do you then write the law in such a way that it achieves your objectives without actually creating such a bad precedent that it's going to completely undermine
everything
the structure
else
going forward?
Yeah.
And to my perspective, it's better to have a disreputable person on that position,
mm-hmm.
and keep everything else even, rather than trying to retrofit an outcome and then pay the consequences years later. And we've already seen that, it can be potentially disastrous when you try and retrofit the law in order to deal with a particular person. And the case of Jacob Zuma is a case in point. I was very clear that he should never have been sentenced by the Constitutional Court. Never. Because the Constitutional Court's job is not to issue sentences.
No, it's to determine the constitutionality of the decisions and laws.
Absolutely correct. And really what should have happened is at the point at which Zondo, in his capacity at the time as head of the State Capture Commission, at the point at which he then protested to the Constitutional Court, the Constitutional Court should have simply just kicked it right back and said, look, the guy's in contempt. It's your job to tell the police to arrest him.
Yeah, that's what should have happened. But look, I got caught up in all the excitement about him going to escort.
Exactly. So, and it was a terrible decision because I think it severely damaged the reputation of the highest court mm-hmm. In the land, because it's the only time the court has ever issued a sentence against any person. And and what was it done? Why was it done? It was to effectively prevent the former president from running for office the next time round, because of the fact the provision says you can't be an MP if you've been sentenced to more than 15 months. And what was the sentence that they gave him?
Exactly, 50. Yeah, exactly. You're spot on. No, it's. I can't disagree with that. That's what the intent was, and that was my thought. Is that initially when it happened, it should have been thrown back down to the lower court for that has the authority to actually do that, and it didn't have to happen in their court. They can judge that he was contempt based on the evidence that was present. But the thing is that they acted like juvenile school children, the Constitutional Court. And let me explain what I mean by that. So it wasn't like he had been in contempt of court for the first time that day. He got up and walked out twice in hearings before that, going back to November and then the other one. So they just got frustrated, or they just decided the combination of factors. But I agree with you. That was a mistake. Now, here's another one, and I'm going to crow about this. It's not a good thing to crow about, but I was accurate. On June 29th of 2021, I predicted chaos in KZN. I predicted riots, I predicted looting, and I predicted, unfortunately, there would be people killed. Now, the scale of what happened caught me a little bit off guard. I didn't know that it was going to be quite that bad, and I also predicted there'd be trouble in Kanthan, where there was no trouble. It was all over the province. What got me about that whole situation is that there, in my view, was willful, intentional inaction on the part of crime intelligence, military intelligence, the national security apparatus, and parts of the ANC. And this is where you could see the fracture. Look, for people paying attention, we knew the party was divided going back to the party Congress in 2017 when Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma lost by 35 votes. Or 70 votes, what it was. If 35 votes had changed, she would have been so we knew then. But of course, Ramaphosa's tossing cash around probably, and buying votes would be my expectation. And he became the guy. But we've known that fracture's there. And if you didn't believe it then, as I said, when he formed his cabinet, it was full of Zuma stalwarts. All these people loyal to Zuma because he didn't have the power, the gravitas within the party to just do what he wanted. And he was going to be beholden. He'd have to bring these Zuma guys in. Otherwise, it would have been chaos. And now we've seen that play out from 2017 till now. And you can see just how fractured the ANC is. It's a party that's in I don't know if it's terminal decline, but it's certainly in a very bad situation. And we see it, as we've just talked about earlier, in the difference between the National Executive Committee and what's going on with the Government of National Unity, the Grand Coalition, and what's going on in Gauteng. And it's dangerous. It's very bad.
You see, the question to my mind now is the build-up to the municipal elections, which take place in 2 years' time. And that, to my mind, is going to be the real test for what's going to happen in the future of this country. I think right now there's a desperate need on the part of the ANC to try and ensure that they don't end up losing all of the metros come the next municipal elections. And at the same time, Jacob Zuma has been going around the entire province of KZN, and he's been telling ANC councillors that you will need to step down, and we're going to call by-elections, and then we'll put you forward as our candidate. And you're going to see a lot of this happening between now and the next election. So I think that on an ongoing basis, you're going to see a slow and steady transformation of the way in which the municipalities are currently structured. And let's be very clear about this. This is not gentle persuasion, because the number of municipal councillors that get taken out by assassinations across the political spectrum in that province is massive.
Yeah, you see that symbol I put up there?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I know what's going on there. Yeah. The thing, though, is that how effective will this be? And we'll see how much pull Zuma has outside of KZN. Because we've seen it happen in KZN already, and it hasn't always gone their way. I mean, IFP actually won a couple of those councillor positions when they thought it was going to be their MK candidate. But they did.
Well, there's that. But at the same time, take the view that if you were in Jacob Zuma's position, is he really interested in running the country again? Or would he be comfortable with, effectively reestablishing a Zulu kingdom that encompasses the entire province and, puts himself in pole position? Because, it's the thing of better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, right?
I've been telling people, look, when I started doing this, you had the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, you had the United Liberty Alliance, you had, what was the other one there? Anyway, three of the groups. Cape Exit. That was the other one. So you had those three groups, and you had Des Palm, Phil Craig, and Hein Marks. I interviewed all of them because people wanted me to talk to them. And after I talked to all of them, and then I talked about this issue, and I've told people for 4 years, it's a very real possibility that if or ever before you see Cape Independence, you're going to see Zulu break away from South Africa. That's the more serious one. I mean, I think that's more likely. And I think it's fascinating what's going on there, and we'll see as it goes forward. But I don't think that MK. I mean, you look at the numbers. MK has no support really. I mean, in Gauteng, yes, there's a number of Zulu who live in Gauteng, and people voted for them, about 10%, and that's kind of about the number I predicted, about 10%. But the rest of the country, they're non-existent. It's kind of like the EFF in KZN. They got wiped out by MK. That people are talking about, and I analyzed this election as the results came in, and they're talking about how the ANC was defeated because of MK. That doesn't play out if you look at the numbers. MK got 2.3 million votes, and by my estimate, they probably got about 800 to 900,000 ANC voters who gave up, and you could see that in the municipal elections, especially in KZN. I'm not saying there were that many in KZN, but around the country, who just said, I can't vote for the ANC anymore, or they were just disgruntled. They didn't go to the polls anymore because of what happened in 2021 and all the governance issues. But they energized those people in KZN. Plus, they probably picked off another million or so on their own who, maybe they got a lot of voters who'd never voted before. And that isn't being talked about. So the ANC lost 4 million votes from 2019 to 2024. Even if I'm wrong in my analysis, 2.3 million votes, they still had the largest party. That's not why they're where they're at. They're where they're at because of their poor service delivery, the kleptocracy, the disenchantment of the voter base. Look at the low turnout, 58% or whatever it was, terrible. And so all of that played a role. MK did affect them, but it didn't cost them anything. It's kind of like, the PA is going to, unseat the DA in Western Cape. No, that's not going to happen. What Gate McKenzie did is he energized a lot of coloreds who weren't voting. I mean, they did poach some DA votes. But the people that really lost was the Freedom Front Plus. They lost the Western Cape because all their votes went back to the DA. Not all, but most of them. And in KZN, the EFF thought they're going to do really well. They thought they were going to grow in KZN. They're a 2% party. They're nothing in KZN. Thank goodness. Anyway.
So your crystal ball in terms of what's happening in the next couple of months. Well, firstly, let me ask you, is there going to be a war in the Middle East?
Well, there is a war in the Middle East. It's already underway.
Good point. Fair enough. There's
actually two. There's Israel and Gaza, and there's Iran and Israel. And actually, if you go with the Houthis, you still got that going on too. Okay, so let's just, we'll go with Sherman and Mr. Peabody in the Wayback Machine. I don't know if you ever saw that cartoon when you live in the States, but I love that. Anyway, so we'll hop in the Wayback Machine. It's 2019, I think it is, and a historic, unprecedented peace agreement is reached, the Abraham Accords.
The Abraham Accords, yes.
Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Dubai, the Emirates, Sudan, all agree to have relations with Israel.
Probably the finest piece of diplomacy in the history of the United States.
Arguably true. The Camp David Accord would have been one of those, but it wasn't the same scale. So, but that's still held. And yes, arguably it was. And who achieved this? Jared Kushner and Donald Trump. And, of course, it's complete. And now it hasn't fallen apart. Those states are being restrained. And some of those Arab states are saying that, this is Hamas's fault. I mean, they committed acts. So, but how long will that hold is a question. So, yes, there's already a war underway. Joe Biden is sending frigates and destroyers to the Mediterranean from the 6th Fleet or 7th Fleet. This is insane. We're moving troops into places like Jordan. What are we doing here? This is, look, I mean, as someone who served in the military for all this time and someone that taught geopolitical things and national security strategy at postgraduate level, I am very concerned about what's going on. In the meantime, we've got, all these other things. We've got Sudan's war going on. Oh, by the way, the ANC, I got to digress for a second. I'll get back to the ANC is so concerned about Gaza, of course, and it's
they don't don't give a shit about Sudan.
Of course they don't. But these are black Africans. It's in Africa. Anyway, of course not. We know why. But anyway, fellow travelers from the old days. Anyway, so my crystal ball, if Trump gets in, we're going to see things change. I don't know that the war is going to end immediately, but we're going to see things change. What's distressing to me, and I'll be honest about this. I mean, I love South Africans. If I'm honest, well, of course I'm honest. What would I be anything else? But if I'm honest, to use the South African vernacular, it's distressing for me from the IDF and the Israeli government, the approach they took. Not in striking back. That's legitimate. They were attacked. It's an act of war. And it'd been going on for years. If it wasn't for the Iron Dome, there'd be tens of thousands of dead Israelis because they've been launching rockets and missiles into Israel for 15 years from Gaza. No, my issue is this, is that for me, it would have been a heavily special forces operation in surgical strikes, not an all-out invasion. This makes Israel look like a bully, just like 1982 when they invaded Lebanon. If you go back, and I had this conversation with someone the other day, Israel, the political left, Jewish community, and the media were always in Israel's camp. Why? Because in 48, they committed atrocities, just like the Palestinians did and the Arabs did. But in 48, they were attacked on all sides, and they held on, and they survived, and they founded their country. In 56, they were attacked. Unprovoked. In 67, yes, they attacked first in the 6-Day War, but it was because there were tanks massed on the Golan Heights, aircraft on strip alert in Gaza, not Gaza, but in Egypt. And so they struck first in a brilliant campaign and destroyed the Arab armies and their air forces. In 73, in Yom Kippur, in the middle of a holiday, they're attacked. The country nearly collapsed. If it hadn't been for the Soviet Union intervening with Egypt and the U.S. pouring lots of aid into Israel, Israel wouldn't be a state. So that was how close it was in 73. So they always had everyone's sympathy. Up until 1982 when they invaded Lebanon. And they were justified in invading Lebanon. I mean, they were being attacked, rocket attacks coming from there by Hezbollah. They had to do something, and they did something. But it was perceived as bullying. And to be fair, rightly so, it was a bit of that. And that's what's being perceived now. That's why Israel is in trouble right now, because they've been so heavy-handed. And, it's not a law, but the theory of proportionality should come into play here. You do only the damage necessary. There's been some overly excessive damage, to say the least, in Gaza. It looks like they're trying to turn it into sand, glass. So I think that's an issue for Israel. Trump, I think, can get them to dial it back, I believe, because of his close ties to Israel. And maybe they'll change their approach. But I would have done it very differently. This would have been a heavy drone and special operations thing, not this destruction of everything. I mean, what's the plan? Are we going to give lots of defense contracts and civilian contractors money to rebuild it afterwards? And there's a gravy train? Is it South African construction mafia moving to Gaza? Come on, what's going on?
So I think, so my take on it, and, I said it pretty much at the time, that really what Netanyahu should have done at the time was to actually hold fire for a period of 2 weeks.
Well, they did. They sort of did.
No. I'm saying 2 weeks is a bit of a thumbs up, but essentially to say to the world, there've been unimaginable atrocities that have been committed. We are going to hold off on actually retaliating at this point. We want all of our hostages to be returned within this very specific period. And we want those who are responsible for this to surrender themselves. And in the event of this not happening, we are then going to unleash unimaginable And had they actually gone through the process of bringing the world on side at that level, I think that the narrative would have been very different.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But essentially, the props to the Iranians at this level. They're fundamentally aware of their own limitations, and so they do show restraint. And you see, even though you do have the ability using conventional missiles, and let's be clear, this is a numbers game. Iran has a massive number of conventional missiles that are capable of pretty much flattening Tel Aviv. And no amount of Iron Dome defense is going to be able to cope with that particular barrage.
No, because it'll be too much, and they'll get through. Yep.
You'll pretty much overwhelm it. But what I'm saying is that had they been playing an emotional game at the point at which you had the assassination taking place on their soil. And by the way, there's a movie waiting to be made there in terms of how the Israelis pull that off. Wow, it's like that's forward planning on another level. But to go back to the question right now of the big picture in terms of how this plays out, the one thing that's very clear to me is that it's not a question of whether Iran ends up getting the bomb. It's a question of when.
Yeah.
And going back to the 80s when I went to university in the US, and the guy who graduated in the year that I got there, his senior thesis, which subsequently became classified, was how to build a nuclear bomb. And he basically pull this together on the basis of how you would effectively be able to assemble all of the necessary components in order to enrich uranium and so forth, pretty much in your garage. And, if he's, as an undergraduate, able to figure this out, tell me that the assembled multitudes of Iranians are not able to do the same thing. And so now that to a large extent is going to, at the point at which the Iranians then announce that this is the case, what is the play that is then left? Now that becomes a really difficult thing to pull off. I think that between now and November, what I'm expecting is to see Iran suddenly announce that they have the bomb. And the immediate impact of Iran announcing that they have the bomb is going to be one of two possible things. It's either Netanyahu who goes batshit crazy and presses all of the buttons, and we have total and utter conflagration, or there's a pullback. It doesn't mean that Iran is going to attack Israel. I think that they'll continue doing that through their proxies in Hezbollah and through the Houthis, but I don't think that there's going to be a direct attack on Israel between now and then. Best possible scenario for me is, I think that if Trump does end up coming into power, it's very clear that he does have the ability to talk to the Iranians. Because he's able to talk to everyone.
He talked to North Korea, and they stopped launching intercontinental ballistic missiles over the Sea of Japan.
Absolutely.
Because he stroked little Kim's ego. He got it. He understood what he had to do.
Yes, but he strokes his ego in public, but you can rest assured that behind the scenes was, and that's what actually matters, because the nature of diplomacy, people used to give Thabo Mbeki a hard time about the policy of quiet diplomacy, and everyone used to pour scorn on it. And I said, guys, you have to understand that all diplomacy is quiet. Okay, there's diplomacy and there's gunboat diplomacy, and those are the two potential things. And diplomacy is never conducted in the public arena. It's all what goes on behind the scenes.
No, that's just all for the cameras. That show. That's strategic communications. Trust me, I've worked in a dozen embassies and have been in over 40 of them of our embassies, and of course many foreign embassies. And you're 100% correct. That's how it's done.
So I'll use the example of what Trump did in Afghanistan, because he was very clear he wanted to end that war. And so what did he do? He took that, what's it called, a massive ordnance. But anyway, it's a...
Mother of all bombs. Mother of all bombs
is what it's normally referred to. Yeah, the Moab, and he drops it on the Taliban.
Yep.
Okay,
That was a wake-up call.
biggest conventional bomb ever built. He drops it on the Taliban. Then he calls the Taliban. He says, "Now that I've got your attention, here's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, we are going to be pulling out of this country, and you are going to be playing by the rules. We are going to be gone by May, and at the point at which we are gone, you are expected to play nicely with these people. Otherwise, we will continue to drop more bombs on you."
But there was one more piece of it that people don't recognize, and you're probably maybe you're aware of it. The deal was we were keeping 10,000 troops for training the Afghan forces, which was a credible deterrent. And so he also had that in his pocket. We're not engaged in a war, and we weren't. We hadn't been in war for 18 months when Joe Biden pulled us out of there. He lied and said we're at war. The last combat casualty was January of the previous year, 18 months prior, because we weren't in combat. Now we did have combat,
but the reason why this thing went pear shaped, let's be very clear, is that the pullout was supposed to happen by May. But then Joe Biden decided that he wanted a symbolic payout on September 11th. And the Taliban then just basically gleefully rubbed their hands, and they went around the country talking to everyone who had been set up in the Afghan military and saying, "Hey, we want you to come over to our side." And so but the point at which September rolls around, suddenly the Taliban effectively have control of the country.
Well, but Kanthan, those 10,000 troops weren't going to come out. They were staying as part of a security agreement, and but a lot of people thought that. I mean, that's what Biden said. We have these troops there. They're in a war. They weren't in a war. They were security force assistance. I mean, I've done that all over Africa and the Middle East. I mean, that's what I did for years, and that they were going to stay there long term. That was the agreement, and the Taliban knew that, so it was a credible deterrent, not just the Moabs. And the point is that Biden lied. Of course, people died, and so, but those troops, and then, so when the Taliban saw those troops are coming out, clearly this guy, doesn't even know what a Moab is. There's no threat. We'll do what we want. And that's what they did. And the horrors that befell the Afghan women, what a horrific situation. Good Lord.
At the point at which the Afghan girls were pulled out of school, it's, I think that I'm a hard bastard, but I wept at that point, literally.
Yeah.
Because that's unspeakable cruelty. You've put these young girls through a lifetime of education, and now you've been told that you shall not go further. You will not be allowed onto the streets. Yeah, it's unspeakable cruelty.
Well, and it just, I mean, the videos we saw of women just being executed on the streets, just grabbing them and shooting them in the head and killing them. Women being raped by the Taliban. You know what a shame that is in that part of the world, in that community. I mean, rape is a horrific crime anywhere, but in that part of the world, I mean, then you get shunned by your family. You just become destitute. And then if you survive, what's your option? Be a prostitute in so many cases, or starve to death. It's brutal. It's medieval what's happened in Afghanistan, and Joe Biden is entirely at fault, and no one's talking about that. And Kamala Harris is part of that. She's on the national security team that meets with these people, make these decisions. These people cannot be allowed to go in government. I mean, look what's happening in the UK with Keir Starmer already in there, like how quickly that country's fallen apart. Look, I'm not saying that Rishi Sunak and the previous administrations were any better. The Tories have betrayed conservatism. They're leftists themselves in disguise. But Starmer and what's going on now, unbelievable. I mean, it's not even balanced. It's what's happening here. It's pretty frightening. The UK is on fire right now as we speak.
Well, there are parts of the UK that's on fire, but again, it's a disproportionate response on the part of Starmer against anyone who wants to pretty much enforce the sentiment that went back to the days of Brexit.
Yeah, but you're right.
Starmer's very clear that he's never been a supporter of Brexit.
Yeah, well, I was always a supporter of Brexit. I'm not a fan of the European Union. I don't believe in countries that are sovereign, surrendering their sovereignty to a bureaucratic organization in Brussels. That's why the AU works for me. It doesn't work for Africans because they don't understand it. I worked at the African Union. People are like, oh, it's terrible. It doesn't do anything. It's not a sovereign body. No African state has surrendered any degree of sovereignty. It's a talk Just like SADC, it's a talk session, but it's much more effective than SADC, to be honest. I mean, it's a place where people try to come up with resources, come up with plans, and countries have to voluntarily agree to do it. And oh, by the way, 85% of its budget comes from America and the European Union. They can't even fund the thing themselves. So, and all of its secrets are taken by the Chinese.
Well, yes, the Chinese built the parliamentary building and then, peppered it with spyware.
And Kanthan, I was there, and I would meet with people from other countries, and other militaries, and it's a gorgeous building. I don't know if you ever had a chance to go there, but I go inside it, and I'm like, and they start talking. I say, listen, why don't we get a coffee? And so we go, and I said, no, not here. As we walk out the building, let's go to a coffee shop down the road. We go down the road, and they're like, when they're puzzled, I'm like, look, we can talk freely here. There's people around us saying, what do you mean you can talk freely? You realize there's listening devices in that building? What? No, I said, no, there's cameras. There's cameras and microphones. Do you notice the building outside by the gate that has over 200 Chinese engineers and workers? The building was finished 3 years ago. Why are they still here? Because they run the surveillance system. No, they don't. And then after I left the AU, it was disclosed, it was revealed that there were bugs and cameras in every place.
But again, kudos to the Chinese for pulling that off.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
But I mean, to be fair, it's a little obvious when you keep 300 or 200 Chinese working in construction buildings for a building and a campus that was completed 3 years prior. They should have been cleverer than that. They were clever putting it in, but they should have had a building nearby where they kept Chinese as a construction company do other projects and are actually intelligence operatives. But but kudos to them pulling it off. Anyway, yeah. So I think that was interesting. But no, and I'm gonna push back on the UK thing. You say there's parts. There's lots of parts of the UK that are fire. Manchester, Leicester, Southport, London, all over the country. This is happening. It's not isolated in the Midlands or in London. It's all over the country, and it's a combination of right-wing white people who perceive themselves as patriotic, responding to what they falsely believe occurred. But it's built up tension over a period of time that's going on here. And it's an overreaction from the Starmer government to that, while they willfully ignore the other side of the equation, which are Islamist Muslims running around with scimitars and sticks and boards and swords in the streets and threatening people and beating people up and attacking white people wherever they see them. This is not being reported by the press. And so it's out of control. And this government is uneven. They need to address both sides of criminality to stop this. But they've sent a clear message. You can do what you want if you're one group, and no group should be allowed to do what they want. They should all adhere to the rule of law. Anyway.
Well, unfortunately, the people in the UK don't have access to firearms. And so, I'm sorry, their country is lost. Let's be very clear.
Oh, it's gone. It's gone. UK is gone. Yeah. It's gone. Look, I mean, and this isn't a xenophobic thing because I'm not British, and it's also not a racist thing because the people aren't just, they aren't people of color. We're talking about Poles and Russians and Serbs and people from all over the world that are in the UK. This pushback against Brexit is a consequence not of the recent immigration just before they went there, but it's from the previous wave. When Schengen came into effect, England and the UK was flooded by a few million people from the EU. White Catholics from Poland, 800,000 of them living in the UK. Not all Catholics, but white Poles living there. And other people from Eastern Europe and around Europe flooded into the UK. The intent of Schengen was for bankers and media moguls to move all around the EU and do their business without worrying about visas and have freedom of movement. But it turned into, which anybody with half a brain could have predicted, a mechanism to allow unconstrained movement, which could be problematic for member countries. And so
when those 800,000 people pitched up, they then had all of the benefits of the UK's
social system
at the time excellent social system.
Yep, and that's where the pressure started. But when Brexit came into the conversation, it's all these old white rural racists. They just don't want people of color in the UK. No, it's not. You're missing the point. They've surrendered their sovereignty, and they're pissed off that they have to get a plug that has this many things for the mains, and they can't farm here, they can't have sheep there because the AU or the EU's regulations on agriculture, the Common Agricultural Policy, and they're being told they can't do this. They can only work. Piss off! What's that? We're a sovereign nation, except they're not. Brexit returned some degree of sovereignty to the UK, and that's what it was about. But it was falsely put in terms of. And look, I'm not going to be stupid. Obviously, there were some racists that didn't want people coming in the country. They wanted to be white or whatever. That's true, but that's everywhere. That's everywhere. And that's just a small number of people. The real reason for Brexit, it all started with Schengen. That's the bottom line. You'll notice the UK never abandoned the pound sterling. They never went to the Maastricht Agreement. They never did it, and with good reason. Denmark did not.
That was Thatcher, basically, because Thatcher dug in her heels way back in the early days and said, we will never give up sovereignty of our currency.
Yep.
And they tried to persuade her, no, you can have the Queen's head on the euro coins, and she said, no, it's not happening.
Yep. That was a good move, actually, although the pound sterling is not nearly the currency that it was back in the 1980s, but then nothing is. Basically, it's two currencies globally. It's the euro and the dollar. And both of them are weak, and the only reason that they're the kings is because there's no one else that can take the throne. The BRICS can talk about their currency, but nobody's going to buy that currency. Russia and Tanzania are exchanging things in rubles and kwacha. Okay, let's see how long that lasts.
Well, gold still works. Let's be very clear about this.
Okay, but the entire history of mankind, all the gold mined is equal to like 11 Olympic swimming pools total. That's it. It's finite.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's why it makes it
precious.
Finite. That's why it makes it precious.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Listen, Kanthan, I'm enjoying the conversation, and I'm not trying to chase you away, but I also am cognizant of the fact that we didn't discuss how long we talk, but usually I do these for about 90 minutes, and we've done that.
Okay.
I
think we've just done that.
We've got our biggest audience at the moment who's tuned in because people are coming in for my news, and they're discovering that we did this earlier. So I'm going to put you on the spot now in front of everybody. What do you think of this format? Do you like it? Are you enjoying it? I'm loving the conversation.
I think it's a great conversation. The question is how often, we get to revisit
every night
these conversations.
No. Good Lord, no, we couldn't do this. No, look, I don't think we should commit.
I'm picturing a snowball, and I'm picturing hell at this point, and trying to get them together.
Yeah, I don't think it should be. Look, we shouldn't commit to when we're going to do it. I think we should do it as episodic. I think that's what we should commit if you want to do it.
Absolutely, yes. And I think let's take it as it comes, and it's been a fun conversation. I've enjoyed it. I've gathered some insights, particularly in terms of how the voting machines work, and the idea that you get to be a judge of a polling district. I think that's something to put up on the wall and say, yeah, I'm a judge of a polling district.
Well, it's interesting.
I think it's a flex.
You say that. That's interesting. But again, I did say I'm kind of a humble person. I really am. I mean, look at the wall behind me in my studio. Do you see any of my decorations from foreign governments, from the military? And I've got so many of them. I just don't hang them up.
Well, what you see on the wall behind me is a meme, basically.
I saw that.
It's a stylized, but it's a virtual background. But it's a stylized rendition of the woman versus cat theme, which I quite like. Memes
and also
add value to my life.
Well, that's great, but then also it's ironic, and I saw that because at the moment we've got this mini brouhaha over J.D. Vance talking about lonely cat ladies. So I saw that, and I didn't mention it. That's so funny. By the way, we didn't go there, but I think J.D. Vance was a terrible selection for Trump. That's just telling you that. I mean, I think both vice presidential picks were poor ones, but the worst, of course, was Tim Walz and Kamala Harris. The Democrats, I think, are going to pay a price. Usually, the vice president has no impact, but the Trump campaign is going to hammer how left this guy is and just what he's into, and that's going to have an impact, I think. So, anyway.
Well, Trump first needs to win an election, and let's see how that goes.
No, that's what I'm talking about. That's in the campaign between now and November. Usually, even when Sarah Palin was picked, it wasn't a big deal. They talked about it for a week, and then they went the people back to the campaign. Waltz is going to be talked about.
Well, Dan Quayle being another case in point. You might remember Dan Quayle.
Yeah, but Quayle was actually. I mean, he was picked on by the media, but he was he was just there, but he wasn't a bad vice president. He was just there. I mean, that's how vice presidents were up till that stage. They were just there for a long period of time. It wasn't until Cheney came in that vice presidents became consequential, and actually did stuff. Cheney was, whether you like him or not, and I detest him, but Cheney was a very consequential vice president who heavily influenced our foreign policy. And of course, I didn't like him from his time as defense secretary. He was defense secretary when I was sent to the Gulf War. That's not why I disliked him. I mean, I just disliked him because of who he was and how he behaved. And boy, I'll tell you what, his offspring, the evil spawn, she's even worse, Liz Cheney, than he ever was.
Well, no arguments there. Yeah.
Anyway, so all right, folks. Iconic. You guys can let me do a poll real quick before we leave. Okay. Do they like the title? Because I like the title. Real quick, I should have done that earlier. Do you? Let me see. Do you like the title? I cannot type, man. This is terrible. Of this segment. And I'm going to ask you a question before we depart here. so that people get to know a little bit more about you, because not everybody knows who Kanthan Pillay is. So I have put links in the description to your Twitter account. I can't bring myself to say X. It sounds like a porn site. But not that there's anything wrong with that. No, but I put the link to your Twitter account and also to your website, which is pretty easy to find. But can you tell people a little bit about yourself, your background? You've been in media for a long time, and you also do some other things.
Yeah, well, look, I think the short answer is to actually just get people to go across to the website and read the extremely long and boring biography that's in place. Well, it's boring to a certain extent, but really not that much.
Well, I found the biography portion that talks about the IT world and what you did there fascinating. But then I'm an IT geek, so.
Well, and I still play quite heavily in that space, so it's I guess the thing that if people were to ask me at any given point, what am I all about? I've been what my wife would refer to as a portfolio careerist, and I have this propensity to get bored very quickly. Once you do something and do it well, then you do it well for a while, and you run out of the excitement of having done that, and at that point you start looking for new challenges at a number of levels, and I've tried to do that pretty much my entire life. So I'm at the particular phase right now. Well, dabbled in politics for a while. Then I've written a book on how to fix the country, which, by the way, is available on Amazon. It's How to Fix South Africa.
$1 billion Zimbabwean dollars.
I think it's $20 US.
That's pretty good for a book these days.
Yeah, but it's free on Kindle Unlimited if you happen to have that. So, that's a good way to get into it. And I think a lot of what I've mapped out there is, to a large extent, the stuff that I engage with in terms of podcasts, which is to try and say, look, we've got these extremes. So we've got a lunatic fringe on the right and a lunatic fringe on the left. But we've got all of these people that are clumped in the middle. And for all of us who are clumped in the middle, can we agree on the following things? And if we can agree on the following things, how can we actually achieve them? And I think that's kind of a core idea that I've been trying to work towards. And of course, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do because of the fact that people want you to take sides, and they want to pull you into one of the other of the fringes. But I am trying to, in every way, in every way, to do something that's building a world that I'm more comfortable living in. So, yeah, short answer.
Well, that's a great answer, and just elaborate on myself kind of answer, because we have never talked about this. I empathize with you 100%. If you're intellectual, you're inquisitive, if you're inclined to lead and to develop and change things, if that's what drives you, which it seems to drive you and also drives me, then you quickly master something, and you don't want to spend your rest of your life doing that. When I was enlisted, I became very proficient at what I was doing in the Signal Corps, but that was the challenge. That was it. I've already done what I can do. All the different systems, all the different ways it's employed. And the only thing I hadn't done was gone to war, but I did that later on. I mean, the war was not what I wanted to do. That's the last resort. But my point is I'd mastered it. So I went back to university to become an officer, to go in intelligence. And then the intelligence people are like, well, you stayed in the Army 37 years. Yeah, but you realize I did so many different things all the time. I mean, I worked at the National Security Agency. I worked at Defense Intelligence Agency, at the Pentagon, U.S. European Command, U.S. Africa Command, 8 countries in Africa I was stationed in, 8 or 9. I can't keep track. Anyway, and I taught at university. I taught undergraduate, postgraduate. I ran HIV programs, tuberculosis programs, built schools, clinics, hunted terrorists, fought in combat. It was always a new challenge, and that's why I stayed. And I felt I can make a difference. And, I always told people, I said, stay in the Army as long as, number one, I feel I'm making a difference, or number two, I'm having a good time, and hopefully both simultaneously.
And hopefully both, exactly.
Yeah, but they weren't always there together, but there was always the possibility that it would be fun or it would be something accomplishing. And that's why I stayed. The only reason I left the military is because you age out at some point. And as a colonel at 30 years, got to go. So, so I empathize with you 100%, and I certainly appreciate that, and why you dabble and go different places. And that's, now in retirement, I started consultancy, and I do that. I do consultancy services, and I started broadcasting, doing this, a YouTube content creator, but that became an actual journalist, accredited journalist, and so I'm doing that, and it's life is fascinating, is it not, Kanthan? And we should take advantage of it and grab the rose.
And no matter all of the stuff that's going on, when you think about it, this is really the best time to be alive.
I don't disagree. It's such a fascinating time. I can't imagine living in the 17th century with all the diseases and all the short lifespans and the how long it takes to travel from place to place. I mean, if I wanted, I would be in South Africa tomorrow. I mean, I just have to pay for it.
But you are able to help the plane, and so come on over and we'll have a steak.
All right, sounds like a plan. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Kanthan Pillay, and this is Iconic with Kanthan and Chris. I hope you enjoyed it. God bless and have a good day. Any last thoughts, Kanthan, before we wrap it up?
No, this has been lots of fun, and I look forward to the next one.
All right, I'll let you drop off, and I'll do the closeout, okay?
All right.
All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. Kanthan Pillay, rock star in my book. I really, really enjoyed that. Thank him. This is our inaugural broadcast of the Iconic segment. I hope you liked it. I named it. I think Kanthan thought it was okay. I don't know if he was really enthused by it, but he said he liked it. And I hope you guys like it. Let's see what the poll says. Not everybody's voting in the poll, so let's take a look at that before we wrap up. And 82% like it. So 8 out of 4, 8, 16, 32 out of 40 roughly. 33 out of 40 liked it. So thank you for that. All right, so we'll stick with that for now. We might come up with some intro music and with a better banner, but thanks a lot. I love these conversations. I hope you enjoyed them as well. This is a fascinating conversation, and we went all over the world. We did South Africa from an outsider's perspective. We did from an insider's perspective. We did the U.S., same thing, and we talked about the Middle East, both of us outsiders in the Middle East. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for being here. You will be redirected to my news broadcast, which starts in 11 minutes if you want to hang around for that. You can go to the fridge, get yourself something to drink. If you got to go to the loo, go pick your mail up if it's been delivered. Put your shutters down if it's time to lock up for the evening. But the news is coming up in about 10 minutes, and I hope you guys can join. Well, 12 minutes. Did my clock go backwards? I saw that 49 says 48 now. But thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll ask people in the next stream because I didn't get a chance to watch the chat very much because it was so engaging with Kanthan. Anyway, folks, that's it. My thanks to all of you who commented. Thanks to you who put the like button, although we didn't get to 100. What's up with that? Hit the like button. Come on. That's not fair. Kanthan worked really hard in this segment.
That was easy.
And I only paid him in peanuts. I sent him a bag of peanuts. It's a low salary for the performance. No, just kidding. Hit the like button, folks, and we'll catch you on the news program in a few minutes. God bless and have a lovely evening. Really appreciate your presence here. And my thanks to Kanthan, my co-host. And we'll see you in a few minutes. Cheers, everybody.